welcome to Sciences Po. You are now in Menton at home, but also in this campus at home. So if you would like to come back for whatever reason, feel free. We are here together now for about an hour and a half. We can go till 8:15 for us to learn a bit more about your work, your inspiration, your stay here, your projects. So I hope you guys will enjoy. Thank you so much, and have a beautiful evening. And once again, thank you that you came.
So good evening, everyone. So thank you for being with us. So you're Dr. Selina Tusitala Marsh. You're a poetess from New Zealand. You're Samoan, Tuvaluan, English, French, and Scottish, and aims to commemorate Pacifica and Maori culture and identity through your work. You're a professor in the Pacific and Maori literature and creative writing in the University of Auckland, but also you work with younger schooled age children. You've been honored with the title of the New Zealand Poet Laureate, the Commonwealth Poet, and you have been honored with a new, also you perform poetry in front of the Queen Elizabeth II, and you are now named the Commonwealth Poet Laureate for 2025-2027, if I'm not mistaken. And your work ranges from poetry collections like Fast Talking, PI, where you explore the themes of Pacifica identity and post-colonial consciousness, amongst others, to your PhD with the 5 Women of Pacific Descent to published collection of poetry in English. And I'm going to let Sylvie continue to introduce you.
What else about Mrs. Marsh is that she's the author of the Mophead series that you can see right here. They deal with the story of what you went through during the laureateship, the New Zealand Poet Laureateship, as well as your childhood and much more difficult topics in a very accessible way, such as colonial identities and, in general, how you identify yourself as a child and grow. And you're here because we said you're the winner of the Katherine Mansfield Fellowship. And this is one of New Zealand's most prestigious literary awards. And it is named after Katherine Mansfield, one of the most interesting and famous New Zealand authors who spent time in Menton during the end of her life. And it gives artists from New Zealand the opportunity to spend time in Menton to write and really indulge in their art. And what else about you is that your Mophead series is actually getting translated into French very soon, so everybody else here who doesn't speak English will be able to read it. So welcome. We're very happy to have you.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou, talofa lava, bulavanaka, māloelele, kia orana, whakalofalahi atu. I greet you in some of the languages of Oceania, the largest ocean in the world, and I'm very proud to come from Aotearoa, New Zealand, as the Katherine Mansfield Menton Fellow. I would be remiss if I didn't hand it over to one of the guardians of the fellowship just to ensure that you have the context for me being here in the first place. So I'd like to introduce William Rubinstein, who had a fantastic writers' party for me when I first arrived in Menton a month and a half ago. But William, if you would like to just briefly explain the fellowship to everyone here.
So my name is William Rubinstein. I am French, as you can hear, but I also am a New Zealand citizen. After spending 7 years in New Zealand, I took New Zealand citizenship. And to talk about Katherine Mansfield, she was born in New Zealand, but thought that the country was a little bit small, and she decided to go over to the UK. And then there she caught tuberculosis, and at the time, antibiotics didn't exist, so there were a lot of people who were sent to Menton because they thought that the sun would cure them, but unfortunately the sun didn't do any effect, and the cemetery in Menton is full of people who had tuberculosis. But she spent 2 years there in 1920 and 1921, and she was very, very happy in Menton, in what was called Villa Louise, which is now Villa Isola Bella. And after living in Menton for almost 2 years, she went to Avon, near Fontainebleau, and she died there. She was very seriously ill. And after World War II, this memorial was opened by, and there was one of her famous lovers, Francis Carco, is a French writer. And then there was nothing much going on in this memorial. And in the 70s, a few New Zealanders decided that it was a shame not to have this memorial used. And with the city of Menton, they decided to invite a fellow, a writer, every year to Menton. So there has been 50 of them. And since I came back from New Zealand, I welcomed the 38th, and Selina is the 38th writer that I have the pleasure of welcoming, and it's always a pleasure for me to welcome these writers. You may know just one of them, Janet Frame, because she wrote a very interesting book of memoirs, An Angel at My Table, which was made into a film, and which is very, very good. But you also had very, very interesting writers, such as Witi Himaera, and of course Selina, who is a fantastic writer. So now I hope that in the 10 or 20 years to come, there will still be a New Zealand writer going to Menton to honor the memory of Katherine Mansfield. And I would like to thank the city of Menton to welcome these writers very warmly, especially Madame Juste and Monsieur Rousseau is just there who works with her. And thanks to them, the writers are very warmly welcomed in Menton, and they spend a good time writing what they feel like, either poems or novels or short stories. Thank you.
Merci. Thank you, William. So, and Katherine Mansfield wasn't just famous in New Zealand. She is internationally renowned, and she wrote 5 of her most famous stories in Menton. So it's kind of a ritual. It's a kind of sacred rite of passage for any writer in New Zealand. It's a dream come true to be able to, be here in Menton just to give birth to our various book projects, which we'll get on shortly. But in the Pacific, we introduce ourselves through either chant or song or prayer. And my form of introduction is through a poem. It's called Naming Myself. My full name is Selina Tusitala Marsh. And Tusitala is the Samoan and Tuvaluan word for storyteller or teller of tales. My grandfather's name was Tusitala, and he lived in Tuvalu, and he was named after the great Scottish writer Robert Louis Stevenson when he had voyaged around the Pacific and in that area for about 3 months. And so as people who have for whom orality is the way of knowing and marking the world, prior to written writing, we kept our histories in our chants and how we called places and people. So there's a whole generation of Tusitala named after Robert Louis Stevenson, who of course was the canonical Scottish writer who wrote Treasure Island, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, very famous, important stories. And it's quite marvelous for me to reclaim that legacy, that storytelling legacy that I've been born into. But of course, writing from a very different position. I'm not white, I'm not male, and I didn't come from a privileged background. So straight away we get the creation of a decolonial space. But in 1996, I gave my first conference paper in Hawaii. And I was only a year into my doctoral studies under who was considered the godfather of Pacific literature, Albert Wendt. And he had sent me off on this first international conference. I had never even given a student seminar before that, outside of my own classes. So I was panicking a lot on the flight from Auckland to Honolulu, 8 hours, and in 8 hours I had turned my conference paper into a plate of spaghetti bolognese. Like it was, I'd red-lined it, red-penned it. I know some of you have been there, right? And because of course I primarily work on paper, and I kept thinking, who do I think I am going to this first landmark international gathering of writers, scholars and artists from all around the Pacific? First wave writers. These are the people who fought for independence throughout the Pacific. These are the people who fought for human rights, gender equality, and so forth. And who was I? And then this poem came to me from my grandfather. Tusitala, teller of tales that I never heard till yesterday, born away for another life. Today, the tale I tell is theirs and yours, a way of seeking some more of more of my sacred center. Today, the tale I tell will book its way through tongued histories, sanctioned mysteries, spaces of silence, timeless lives. Tala Tusi, tell the book, word the spirit of brown, in theory and creativity, we make our sound renowned. Thank you.
That was very beautiful, and we all enjoyed that, I'm sure. And to begin with our little questions, then we will have time for questions from the audience too. And I'm sure we have already asked you this 100 times since you have come here, but how are you liking Menton? How are you feeling here? And what do you think about our beautiful city?
Well, Katherine Mansfield wrote in her letters about the quality of light in Menton. And so I've been looking for it, and that has been the thing that strikes me the most. I'm renting a little apartment, well, it's a big apartment actually, in Port Garavon, and it's a kilometre from Italy, and it overlooks the Mediterranean, and I can see the coast and the ancient city of Menton. And I get up just as the sun is coming up, and I have my coffee, and I have a writing practice where I write every morning 3 pages in longhand writing of anything and everything. And everything's quiet, and the light is just spectacular. It's almost like I've got clearer lenses on or something, and it changes all the time. And what I noticed the other day, when it was really stormy and it was cloudy, the sea spray was coming up and something was happening in the atmosphere. So it was like a drizzle, but a clear drizzle. And then this flock of birds came, and I'm just like, I'm in heaven. I'm in writer's heaven. And it's so good for the soul. I'm used to honing my listening skills and my observation of people and places, but there's something about the light here, which I'm just soaking up.
Yeah, and have you indulged yet in any writing, or is there a project in particular that you want to do, particularly in Menton?
Oh my gosh, it's a long time to get here. It's like 32 to 36 hours to get from Auckland to Menton, right? And as soon as I stepped on the plane, I 6 hours on my laptop, because it was in New Zealand, so we had Wi-Fi, and I just hit the ground running, I think, because I'm an academic I've been an academic since 2005, and in New Zealand, every 3 years you can apply to get the next year off, half of the next year off. And so everyone works crazy and then carves out writing time for all the book projects, all the writing projects that we can't get done when we're teaching and doing admin, and I have a huge service role as well that's broadened out, not just in Aotearoa, New Zealand, but the Commonwealth now. So I just hit the ground running, but the big book, and I was saying just before that, you know, it's kind of been 30 years in the making. In 1996, that Tusitala poem, Tell the Tale, that I never heard till yesterday, it took me until my doctoral level research to even discover our own Pacific poets. We had learned English poets and American poets and English poets and American poets. You know, so I knew of a couple, but I did not know that there were 20 of them who'd been writing since 1964. And so my book is called Fetu, the Samoan word for stars, and it's called Star Charting First Pacific Women Poets. And so I am the star charter. I fling them up into the literary sky, and I use one poem of each woman as a portal into her world and her work. Because one of the damaging things that colonialism did in the Pacific was to apply, without questioning, a Eurocentric lens over our literature and our art. And no surprise that our literature and our art were found wanting and not up to quote unquote standard. You know, no one actually said not up to kind of European cultural standards or Euro-American cultural standards. And so my work has been about reclaiming our own aesthetics, reclaiming our own beauty, our own political works through the poetry, and just making them visible in the night sky. So this book is my constellation. I draw connections and links to them. I put them up there, I constellate them, and then I also have, and this actually came from Menton. I was so inspired by the light and doing a lot of my own poetry that I also have creative writing prompts at the end of each chapter on each poet, where the reader can try a little bit out of this poet's technique or their poetics or whatever I identify as their thing that they do uniquely in their in the field. So I could talk forever, for 30 years about this topic. I'm very excited. And I've got now 24 chapters written, and that's the book. And now I'm going through it, and I'm also an artist, so I'm doing line drawings to accompany each woman. So each woman has a star designed after her poetics, after what I've seen and recognize as the special thing she does.
It's really interesting. And when talking about reclaiming what has been lost throughout colonial rule, we can talk about, for example, the oral tradition of spreading art, poems, song in the Pacific. And I'm really interested whether, as you said, you not only write but also perform your poetry, just like you performed this poem for us. How does that change the poem? How does that change what it means, and how does it integrate actually this tradition that has been lost? That's a really great question. I think Sir Ken Robinson in his viral TED talk, he's English. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's called How Education Kills Creativity. And it's hilarious, and he's so great. He was knighted for his services to education. But he talked about in the West, particularly in academia, people see the body's function as to take the head to meetings, right? So it's like that we're quite disconnected from our bodies. And in indigenous cultures in Oceania, that is the core of our knowing.
The knower is the doer. That's the central epistemological insight that I can observe throughout the whole of Oceania. So theory always has to be linked with practice. Otherwise, how do you know? And so performance poetry is a way to reclaim poetry that's just on the page. And I'm, of course, not saying there's no value in that, but there's a life that a poem lives on the page. There's a life that a poem lives on the stage. And one's expertise is being able to bridge those two forums successfully so that you can be a poet who sells books and who also is able to bring poetry alive, not just for people who love poetry, but my own personal mission statement is to take poetry to the unpoeted. The masses of us who have, through our experiences in school, been taught that poetry kind of is hard and difficult and doesn't really have anything to do with me unless I understand everything. And so it's introducing the gift that we've all got, the right to write. So I'm a disciple of Julia Cameron, who is an American writer who's best-selling. It's been decades on the New York Times bestsellers list, but her book is called The Artist's Way, and it's a creative recovery process for anyone who even has an inkling of wanting to be an artist. And one of her tools is this 3 pages of longhand journaling in the morning to get to download what's in your head. For me, it's to download my internal critic, or my internal censor. It's the voice that's saying, you don't know what you're doing and it's rubbish. Or we put that voice on the page, we get objective distance from it, and then we can begin and do the real work at hand. So I think embodied communication is really important to one's sovereignty, whether one stands in one's own land or elsewhere. And the West, particularly our education systems, kind of crunch everything down and just work with here, rather than this whole thing here. So I teach a postgraduate course at the University of Auckland on Pacific poetry, and I instruct the students to clear away the tables and the chairs to the edge of the classroom, and I bring out my fala, my woven mat from Samoa. We lay it on the floor, they take off their shoes, we sit around in a circle, and then class begins. And, everything I do is quite self-reflexive, meaning that we're aware of what we're doing and how uncomfortable it is, and we name what we're doing. So we kind of take away our automatic thinking, and I get them to talk about how they felt. What does this mean to clear away the tables and chairs and sit on the floor in a steel glass building in the middle of Auckland, which happens to be the largest Polynesian city in the world? What does this mean? And my classes, my postgraduate classes, the majority of students there are international students. And so they kind of marvel at this. And, my assessments are driven to embody the learning.
Yeah, thank you. And being an artist, also dealing with very hard topics. And in this Mophead series, so if you don't know, this says the story of Selina, who was teased for her frizzy hair, and she's trying to fit in. And this series was very much acclaimed by the critique and cherished by the youth in New Zealand, because they identify clearly with the character of Selina. And us as political major students, we deal a lot with this question of identity and decolonization processes, especially focused on the Middle East and North African region. But we don't know that much about the Pacific decolonization processes that happened. And I think that would be a really great topic to talk about, and especially through this book that you're presenting today. Yeah. So if you can tell us more about this.
Absolutely. Well, first, so I drew the pictures, and it's my story. It's a graphic memoir. And it's, this is the opening page. When I was 10, I was teased for having big hair. Not just thick curly hair, but wild afakasi hair. Afakasi equals being Samoan plus something else. That's my dad, who is English, Scottish, French. That's my mum, who is Samoan, Tuvaluan, and that's me in the middle. I got thick, wavy hair from my Samoan, Tuvaluan mum, and thin, curly hair from my New Zealand, Scottish, English, French dad. And this is my famous hairy equation. So I've worked, one of my best memories is working with 500 kids, 500 10-year-olds in a huge gymnasium, and I divided them up into 5 groups, and they had to come up with a sound for the hair that I allocated for them, and I recorded it. It was so great. So the kids went beep, 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 beep for the straight hair, and woo for the wavy hair, and for the thin straight hair, and for the little curls they went and then I orchestrated them, got them to do all the sounds all together, 500 10-year-olds. It was mayhem, but it was the visual reading, it was the audio reading of this visual, yeah? And so you ask about identity, that's identity. You ask about politics in the diaspora, this is that story about growing up different and how to turn your difference into your superpower, which, is what I've done. I've just lived it in my life. But I remember the day I just finished the first proof of this, and I showed a colleague, and she said to me, "Why are you wasting your time? You'll never get promoted doing that. You need to focus on academic peer-reviewed articles and getting them published." And I was crushed, but then I thought, actually, I don't respect you anyway. So, I ignored her. It got published. It won the National Book Award. It won the National Book Award for children's fiction, for best design. Like, it just did a clean sweep of the awards. And I don't say that to boast. I say that that it's a great demonstration of the tagline that I used when I became the New Zealand Poet Laureate, which is Tusitala, my name, tell your tale, or someone else will, or won't, as was the case with these 20 Pacific women poets. They weren't even in literary anthologies in New Zealand, for New Zealand, Australia, and Pacific anthologies, right? They were just either footnoted, marginalised, or completely ignored. So tell your tale, or someone else will, or won't. So and in telling your tale, where do you begin but just with you? And we've got everything we need inside of us. And I know that, the students here, your world is opening, like open. What I learned through my university education is that the more I opened to outside, the more I had to be very, very clear about who I was. Otherwise, I would be irrevocably changed by the things out there. And the I is the great big anchor. And if you look, I've got a double page here, the word, and this one, I've got my name, Tusitala, Tusitala. Tusi means to scribe, as in our tattoos. Tala means to tell. I, the letter I, and me, I, stand in the middle of telling and scribing, or writing and telling. This is where the performative thing comes in. And the deeper I got into my own story, the more universal that story became. So this is about growing up and reclaiming the nickname that stayed with me for like 6 years. You know how if you've got the same set of friends in, we call it primary school here, then intermediate and then college, and then the things stay with you. Well, that stayed with me. And how I overcame that and used it, and I didn't overcome it by suppressing it. I embraced it. I embraced my hair, and then as society would happen, it became trendy to have hair like this. So it's like, oh, great. This second memoir, because you mentioned colonial spaces, is when I became the Commonwealth Poet in 2016. This is different from the Commonwealth Poet Laureate that I'm currently. The task is that you're commissioned by the Queen to write and perform a poem for Commonwealth Observance Day in Westminster Abbey, which I did. I accepted before the palace said, oh, by the way, there's some rules to the creation of this poem. There's 5 rules. So this is how I both kept the rules, but as a poet, broke the rules as well. That's why it's called the Queen's Poem. And that was in 2016, and I've just received an invitation from the Commonwealth to perform again in Westminster Abbey, this time for King Charles in March next year. And I think that will make me like the only poet to perform to 2 reigning monarchs in England. So I'm going to like ride that horse all the way, just so I can be left alone at university to do my creative work and research. Yeah.
That is really exciting, and really I don't think anybody else has had the opportunity to do that. And when you mention having to perform in front of the royal family of Britain, my next question brings me about you being the Commonwealth Poet Laureate, as we said, until 2027, and considering the colonial past of the Commonwealth, which 2.5 billion people still carrying their identities, I'm really interested how you balance pushing for a decolonial narrative as seen in your poetry, but you're also a representative of an institution that has been built by these colonial foundations.
Yeah, that's the story in Mophead 2, the Queen's poem. So the word 2, it's a homonym for the second book, number 2, but tu is the Proto-Polynesian word that means to stand and be rooted. And it means to kind of stand erect in terms of nothing blowing you down. So Mophead 2 is about how I stood at the heart of the British colonial empire, performing a role in service to Her Majesty, but also serving the Pacific and our own people. And this is the power of creativity. This is the power of poetry, because one of the rules was that I wasn't allowed to be political. And I initially got upset about that because I thought Westminster Abbey being filmed live by BBC, 54 at that time, there were 53 Commonwealth member nations. I thought this is a great platform to bring attention to my grandfather's island of Tuvalu, the rising sea levels, global climate change, how, people who are not responsible at all for CO2 emissions are the ones that are suffering and have to, and dying and leaving their homes. How do I stand there? And in the poem, I'm very political. And the palace had the right to censor the poem, so I had to send it off, and they only changed one word, which was the word colonial, when I talked about colonial histories. And as I say in the book, I didn't need that word anyway. The context is enough. Like the power of telling a story. I'm there on the sacrarium steps at Westminster Abbey, telling the royal family, that you need to be accountable but in the most pleasant way, through metaphor and bees and hives, and it was a real moment. So and you've got to sign things saying you're not, because it's all live, you're not going to break out into a protest, and so it's about being diplomatic and political. But as soon as my role was announced at university during a faculty meeting, one of my Samoan colleagues whispered very loudly so that the whole back row heard. He whispered, "Sell out." So that actually, I was devastated, but that actually, like I did with Moped, I turned that into creative impetus and created this book. And I've actually drawn him in the book. And anyone in our very small Pacific academic community in Oceania can tell who it is, even though, I don't name him or anything. But there he is there. And so, he's wearing a little lapel from Oxford University, because he was one of our first Pacific scholars to get a Rhodes Scholarship. So he was at Oxford training for 6 years, and he calls me a sellout. So, anyway, Revenge best served cold. It took 3 years to get the book out. And it was so funny because I met him the other day, and, he said, "You're not going to believe it, but my daughters insist that I read that every night to them, and I have done that for the last month, and I'm over it." And I just thought that was a really wonderful form of revenge, through creativity.
Yeah, you talked about telling your story, and also there's this dimension of also creating in the youth this will to continue telling stories, either through tattoos or orally. And did you feel before, after the books, do you feel that your book will help the youth speak out more about their situation, their identity, and also embrace their identity? Do you think this is a good way, and do you have faith in New Zealandese youth?
Oh, I know it does, because I'm a full professor. And I've argued successfully with the university that my supreme act of service is to continue going into schools and taking my book and telling my story. And, if I was 10 and I saw someone like me walk in and represent the university, suddenly I would think that that's a possible thing. If I was 10 and saw someone walk in and represent poetry and creative writing, I would think that that's a thing. I did not. It's not very often that people who look like me come in from that context. So it's really important that I'm there live, and when I read the books, kids swarm me afterwards, and they talk about, the thing that makes them different. How could they turn that into, their strength, And not just physical, visible things, but little quirks that they get teased about. How can they turn that into a superpower? But, both books practice what they preach. I knew what to do after I wrote in my journal and figured out what I think. And that is why I continue the practice, because in all the cacophony of stuff vying for our attention, when you've got a clean page and an ink pen, I get to figure out what I think about what's going on, and actually what I think full stop, and therefore what I might create through this is the magic of writing in longhand. Doesn't happen as easily or helpfully, I think, when you're on a laptop, because everything looks finished, and you can't, it's very flat, and you can't put arrows and little drawings and kind of create a work of art even just by sharing your own thoughts on the page. So I know it helps, and I'm involved in a national program called Champions for Compassion. So this is where we, take art and, basically for the good of people's whole being, you know, and we've just doubled the number of schools who have signed up, which I'm not that pleased about because it means I've got more workshops to do. But anyway, like, it is what it is. Yeah. But by the way, if you YouTube Mophead and my name, you'll find a free Mophead film of the book, and it's my voice, and my friend plays the ukulele through it, and it's really lots of fun, and teachers can have that as a free resource as well.
It's really interesting, honestly, how you say art can heal in general and be good for your whole well-being, physical and mental. And this brings me to my next point, that you're an advocate for this power of art. And so can you please tell us more about this, because you mentioned it during our initial meeting with Antoine, and I found it very interesting. But how can art heal, and how can it be good for our general well-being?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So I will preface that by saying, I was hired as a lecturer in the English department in 2005. And I've been a member of the English department for, till today. But 3 years ago, I became the co-director for the Centre for Arts and Social Transformation, which is appended to the university, but it's run from philanthropic funds, so they get to do what they want to do. And it's the world's first research-based centre for arts, therapy and healing. And so we work internationally with different organisations, but most importantly, as a literature professor or as a literature lecturer, the mode of learning is, here's the book, here's the analysis, here's the theory, and here's the output, which is an essay. But for the last 10 years, that has been completely dissatisfying to me. You know, I need to take these stories out into the community, and so I've been changing the nature of my assessments so that students get to go into the community and creatively, evangelistically share their insights about Pacific poets and poetry in general. And that's been wonderful, but I've been flying under the radar in the literature department because that's not, you know, it's quite a conventional, it's one of the oldest departments in the university, and it's not that, you know, it's quite conventional. So when I became co-director of the Centre for Arts and Social Transformation, we do things like, you know, the island of Maui in Hawaii, when Lahaina, the town, burned down, magically all the golf resorts were not touched, nor were the international hotel resorts. But anyway, the town burned down, and it was a historical town. We got word that the children whose homes had burned down and were then staying in hotels were told by their teachers, who were told by the Ministry of Education, do not talk about the fire, it is business as usual. So kids had no outlet to talk about the loss of everything that they had ever known up until then. So we took a team in to Maui, and I don't know how my co-director got permission, but we worked with children and art and theatre, and the stories came out about their experience of a fire that just wiped their town away. And, you know, the follow-up research it's been phenomenal. Like, we've actually changed the policy from the Ministry of Education because they can see, oh, okay, we're not going to be liable for creating trauma among these children. Actually, they're doing better at school when they're allowed to talk about it and express themselves and stuff like that. You know, if we were a community group, we wouldn't be listened to, but because we're an academic institution, we hold a bit of weight because we know that creativity always helps, you know. I mean, it's as simple as that. And giving people the tools and the permission to be creative helps. And next week, at the end of next week, I go to London to host, 56 High Commissioners of the Commonwealth for their poetry reading. And this is the 4th year they've done it. And my first question was, well, what poems are they reading? Oh, they're poems from their country. And I'm like, well, why don't they write their own poems? And they're like, no, we hadn't thought about that. So, well, why don't I take a workshop as their laureate and help people write their own poems, tell their own tales? Nothing wrong with reading someone else's poems, but what a missed opportunity if we've got everyone in the room. And so, that's what I'm doing in a very safe, very playful way. And before you know it, they'll have their own poems. And this is the kind of work I do in the community as well. I work with Pacifica leaders in the middle management corporate sector. I mean, you couldn't get, some of them work in very sterile environments, but we go through a 10-month program where, based on my mission statement that poetry enriches people, places, and spaces, and they can bring their cultural selves through corporate doors and not leave them at the door. Celebrate their cultural selves through this poem. And it's been running for, every year I run it, I think, this will be the last time. It's been running for 11 years now, yeah.
Yeah, and this whole part about well-being and healing also through art. If you had one thing to say to the little Selina in the book who's trying to fit in and who's trying to not care about all the teasing that's happening around her hair and everything, what would you tell her right now if you had it in front of you?
Well, actually, on my office door in the English department, I've got one statement, and it's for my students. And it's for my students who, it feels to me it gets worse every year in terms of the pressure to get it right, to get the best mark, and to succeed, quote unquote. And I don't see it as my job anymore to teach them about content. I see it's my responsibility to help them get in touch with who they were born to be. And so I've got one line from the African American poet and former US laureate Maya Angelou. And she says, "A bird doesn't sing because it has the answer. A bird sings because it has a song." And that captures my reason for being at uni, is to help people sing their song, connect their song. And that's what I tell 10-year-old little Selina. And actually, her life did change. I mean, a very famous New Zealand poet came to our school when I was 10. He was European, but we go back to the embodied power of creativity, and he performed his poems. He was like a bard, a Shakespearean bard, and there's something universal and very true when someone's absolutely in the moment of their craft and being that. And I was magnetically drawn to him. And the question I asked myself at 10 was, which is in Mophead, could I do that? And it planted a little seed that then got covered over with all this other stuff and didn't kind of sprout until much later, but the seed was planted. Yeah.
That is really interesting. I am a big fan of Maya Angelou, as just you said. I have read every poem, Why Does the Caged Bird Sing, and everything, but that is not why we're here. And I think it's time to ask the audience if they have any questions they want to ask our speaker today. We would be very interested. Yes, I think we have one in the back.
Just didn't get that in that time. We're going to make you do that again.
So first of all, thank you,
Madame
for the
President.
conference. Yeah. And so you mentioned you are not only a poet but also an artist. So I was wondering if that you're doing all the drawings and visuals from Mophead, and in general, how do you connect the different arts you're performing?
That's wonderful. Well, first of all, it's based on the belief that everything is holistic, even though Western culture tends to want to put everything into binary forms and boxes, right? So if you go to the Pacific, if you go to my village in Samoa, you won't see a straight line. Everything's curvilinear and in spirals, and the houses that we make are crooked, so what am I saying? So everything is connected. So when I started writing Mophead, I knew that, and I'm not a trained artist, but I did these drawings. They were part of the story. The line was part of this. The crooked lines were part of the story. And when I took it to my editor, who has published all my poetry collections, he loved the story, but he did wonder whether they should get a professional artist in to do the drawings. And I said, I'm a really nice, warm person. I listen to my editor most of the time, and I said, this won't work if you get a professional artist in. The kids need to believe my message, which is, if I can do it, you can do it. And if I don't do my drawn line, when my written line is all about embracing everything is possible, fully express yourself, then that would make me a liar. And, as it happens, people were charmed by the drawings. Things are wonky and they're not the same, and, I worked really hard at that. But it's part of the story. And so as an academic, in order to legitimize what I still felt I was trying to get away with, this massive creative output, I then theorized and created something I call the lead by line methodology. And it's how, beginning with our bloodlines and how our bloodlines connect us to our landlines, and we express them through our written, drawn, and spoken lines. And this is the kind of output of that methodology, that it's all intertwined together. In Māori, and Māori have a saying that talks about, we are the rope of man. Our many strands tied together make for one strong rope. You try and pick away the strands and it weakens the whole human race, if you like. And so I took that also to mean not just different identities, my different identities all woven together as awhakasi, but also different genres of expression. Why should I just be limited to being an academic? Why should I just be limited to being a poet when we actually have all of those modalities at our fingertips? If we have the courage and the access, if we have the inspiration. And for a lot of the big moments in my life, the big decisions I've had to make, I wasn't necessarily ready, but I was willing. And I often use the metaphor, and in the book I'm finalizing the introduction as I speak, but I want to make this book accessible to the general reader. And so I talk about, in the Pacific, the canoe is a major metaphor, the waka, the canoe, right? Because we're supreme navigators, right? We've navigated the largest sea in the world, the ocean in the world, the largest mass of sea in the world. So it's like, in that introduction, I talk about doubt from fear as a constant crew member in my canoe, along with all these other values that I have. But it's like, I'm always, when someone is transparent, when an artist that I admire is transparent, or a critic who I admire, or a writer, it empowers me to be more of myself and to bring it. So the lines, the drawing is absolutely integral to my critical work, therefore my creative work as well. Like this really cleared the way for me, you know, to be brave enough to do this book. Yeah, thank you. And I'm always learning, actually. I'm never afraid. If there's a poetry workshop, I'll go to it. Like, I won't tell anyone who I am, but I'll go to it because, you know, we're lifelong learners, right? I love it. I'll go to anything. I'm coming to your yoga class next week, by the way.
If we don't have any more questions, we want to thank you very much for being here with us. It's such a pleasure to have such people who inspire others. So thank you very much. If anyone has anything to say, a question, something. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Because you're a specialist here and we're not, and each one of us has very busy days, how can we, because we're very tired from everything that's happening around us, how do we keep a heart, as you said in our meeting, and how do we connect with poetry, art in general, in order to hear ourselves in our everyday lives?
Absolutely, that's a great question. And so Julia Cameron has 3 tools to stay connected to your inner artist. So the first one is journaling. And I don't mean journaling as, oh, it's really cute. I mean laying everything on the page, everything that you think. Like, even if you think, I think this journaling is a waste of time and I should be doing my assignment, but something tells me that I want to explore my creative side more. So I'm wondering, you know, that kind of stream of consciousness writing, journaling is one tool. The second tool is that once a week she advocates taking yourself on an artist date. So you know when you go on a date with someone, you meet them somewhere and you go somewhere, this is about taking just yourself on an artist date. It could be an antique store, it could be on the beach, it could be wandering through the back streets of Menton, it could be going to an art gallery. It's an hour where you just expose yourself to some form of beauty, creativity. Because if you're giving out, you have to be taking in. And you can't, you know, and it's really great not to dictate how that form of creativity is taken in. You could sit on a bus and just do a loop and be paying attention to what's happening around you, right? That's the second tool. And the third tool that anyone can do is, she says, go for a 20-minute walk. But the catch is, there's nothing in your ears. Phone is off. Nothing in your ears. You're walking, you're breathing, you're watching, you're listening, you're looking at the quality of light, you're just being with you. So these are 3, like, they seem quite easy, but, you know, in my busy schedule, the journaling is it's a given. Even if I've got to get up half an hour early, it's a given. It's the thing that makes me or stand erect, unwaverable. You're welcome.
I keep looking at your tattoos since the beginning, and can you tell us more about that, like what they mean? Like, exactly?
This is the mythic origin of Samoa on my hands. And, you know, when people ask, oh, what do they mean? I often say, are you actually interested? Because I'll tell you what it means, and you have to sit down for half an hour with me. And I will tell you the story of Samoa's origins. So, you know, they're not just decorative. Every line tells a story. And so one story I will share is this it looks like a sun. It's actually a symbolic Samoan jellyfish. And only women may have this tattoo on their skin. Men are forbidden to have this tattoo on their skin. And in pre-colonial times, there were proverbs and stories that talked about a specific jellyfish that was poisonous. Very beautiful to behold. But if you crushed it, stood on it, accidentally squashed it, you die. Just like with women, right? Very beautiful to behold, but if you squash it, squeeze it, you'll die. So this was understood as part of, the wisdom, pre-colonial wisdom that was in circulation, which effectively guarded against domestic violence, and it was because we lived in extended community groups. When missionaries came, they made a woman accountable to one man, her husband. Whereas pre-colonial belief systems were a woman had her brothers and her uncles to protect and guard her sacred being. So if her partner at the time were to, say, hit her, he would not have a very good time with it, right? So that, it's just one small example of how, these are pre-colonial symbols that go deep to protect the society, which is, has been subject to violence and, disappearance through colonialism and so forth. But they're resurrected if we know the stories. So if I ever see someone with a Pacific tattoo, I challenge them and I say, do you know what you're wearing on your skin, young man? Often it's men. Like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. No, I don't know if you know him.
And do they know what it means?
The young ones tend not to. My sons know their tattoo stories, but and it's not their fault if they don't have, someone to access them, if they don't have an elder to tell them the stories, and if the tattooist, because in the old days the tattooist had to be trained not just in technique but in the culture. So if they go to a non-Samoan tattooist or a Samoan who doesn't know, then they're not going to have the stories, because it takes a long time, So over the hours, the tattooist should be telling the stories. But if they don't know, then it can't be passed on. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
One more line. Yeah,
Oh, sure. Well, so this is the frigate bird. This is the frigate, the symbolic frigate bird. So you'll see it in a lot of Pacific art. It's the navigational bird. So the stories connected with that is that, when we often say goodbye to people, we say, "Ia malanga lau malanga, ia manuia lau malanga." May your journey be blessed. May your voyage be blessed with the birds. So always looking ahead to the birds. And don't do it, or don't go on a life's journey if the signs aren't there. You have to wait for the environment to make it possible for you to go through it. So it's not just like an individual decision, right? It's a collective, communal, relational decision where you see the signs. And I had a conversation with one of the kings of Samoa. There are 4 kingly titles. He's the most, he's the preeminent scholar on pre-colonial religious belief systems, and he's very old, and he is not tattooed. And that's kind of strange for a person of high rank to not have, the men to not have the tattoo on their legs. And I asked him, we had dinner at his mansion with his family, and I said, why do you not have a tattoo? Aren't you meant to have a tattoo? Are you not breaking all the cultural protocols and you're the preeminent, expert? And he said on the morning that he was meant to have his tattoo, a picture of someone fell off the wall, and he knew that ancestor did not want him to receive it. And so the whole thing was called off. And we're talking, like, this was a whole island cultural ceremonial thing. The food was all cooked, the pigs were slaughtered, everything was done, and he said, can't do it, it's not happening, because that was the sign. And really remarkable story. And then my elder just said, oh, he was just scared, it's really painful, it takes weeks to do it the traditional way, but I believe in that. Always look for the frigate birds, always look for the signs. Thanks.
we still have a question, maybe.
So we talked about Katherine Mansfield. I'm not sure that I can see Frida Kahlo on your scarf. So I was wondering, do you have who are your biggest inspirations in general in art and everything? Do you have other artists that inspire you daily?
Well, Maya Angelou and Alice Walker, she wrote The Colour Purple. I've always been inspired by her, and I got to meet her and interview her at the Auckland Writers' Festival a few years ago. And she's such a globally renowned figure. And I remember we were standing in the wings. The auditorium was full, 2,000 people. We were standing in the wings, and I said to her, Alice, how would you like to walk on the stage? Before me or behind me? You know, what would you like to do? And she said, let's just do this. And she held my hand, and we walked out together to a standing ovation for 10 minutes. And I just thought, you know, she, you know, it wasn't just her art, her writing, her political activity. It was who she was as a person. No difference, right? Authentic. And when the audience, at the end of our interview, the audience gave her another standing ovation, she did this beautiful gesture, and she crossed her hands over her heart, and she fluttered her hands like doves. And I said to her later in the green room, I said, what does that mean? Why did you do that? And she said, I'm giving the love back. I'm appreciating them as much as they're appreciating me. And I just thought, you know, there's a walking, talking role model for exquisite humility, groundedness, and knowing who you are, no matter where you are, what you do, who you're with. So Alice Walker would be my top. Thank you.
Somebody else, or... Thank you very much for being with us. Actually, it was a very interesting and wonderful discussion we had with you. It's not often that we have such people with us, so thank you very much.
It was so cool being told what I do at the beginning, like you do. It was cool.
Thank you very much. Your book, Mophead, is being translated in French. Do you want to talk about it really quickly?
I'm not going to pronounce it correctly. Can you pronounce it?
Tignas.
Tignas. Yes. And so that took 3 French translators. Yeah. Are you laughing because of that? 3 French translators took a month to come up with the best equivalent for the word mophead. And they went round and round. And 2 of them know my work really well. And the 3rd one is my French PhD student doing her PhD on Francophone Pacific literatures. And so it gave me insight into the world of translation, which Genevieve would know very well. So I'm super excited about it. It's going to be launched at the Angoulême Comic Festival, an event with that, and I'm very excited because it means that my work can enter into the Francophone Pacific, New Caledonia, French Polynesia, you know, and I'm running a writer's workshop in Tahiti in March where hopefully I'll be able to take some books over for people there. Yeah, very exciting. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and I hope your stay in Menton will be as beautiful as the beginning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.